based on their size or weight. Okay, vitamin D is so safe. The danger of vitamin D is probably not taking enough. But a blood test will tell you because it varies in absorption. All right. Now you may think that even the summer your vitamin D is good, but in fact it may not be, because if you're behind glass, or you wear long sleeves, or you're SPF 4 or above sunscreen, or you're a little bit on the fat side, or you're skinny, you won't be absorbing vitamin D by its conversion. Its conversion in the skin to the active type. But the public health had their own ideas what they're going to do. So they told us all to stay home. Right? They told us to stay apart, to wear masks. All the things were completely useless. There was no scientific evidence to back them up. Of course, the mask, the idea of 6 feet was, first of all, when they do hypnosis, you've ever seen them on the stage, they make people 6 feet apart. Because they're more susceptible, they're more anxious, for example. That's one reason. The other one is that if you spit, you can only spit about 6 feet. Right? So that's what the 6 feet thing is, completely arbitrary. But you know, COVID is not a disease of young children, it's the disease of the aged. And if we look at what they found, for example, in Massachusetts, is the average age of death was 82. And if we look at this slide, you'll see that there are only 15 children, and that's arguable, maybe 14, actually died with COVID. Not necessarily from COVID. In fact, all of them were thought to die from the disease they had at the same time. All right? So, probably in Canada, we have a zero mortality rate. If we look at statistically, based on how many people live in Canada, we definitely have a statistically zero rate. And if we look at influenza, it's 3 times as likely that you're going to catch influenza and die from it as from COVID. In Sweden and Germany, they did some big studies. Sweden looked at almost 2 million children to find that the death rate was 0. And Germany looked at 3 big studies of their population to find the same. The death rate for children, and this goes up to age 19, 16 in the first case, and 18 in the second, statistically, not just statistically, but over. And that's what we can expect. So why would you go after a person, particularly a child, when the mortality rate is so low with a shot, which is high risk? 3 out of 4 children will not have any symptoms from COVID. In fact, when they looked at ICU admissions, 0.2% out of per 0.2 per 10,000 cases in the ICU, right? That's so small. And they didn't have enough deaths to actually be able to measure. And what about passing COVID on to your parents or on to the teacher? But you know, to be a teacher is the safest place to be, based on a large Swedish study. And children do not pass COVID upward. It all comes down to the kids. And they hardly ever pass it to their kids, the other kids in the school. When it gets to them, it stops. So the idea that you're going to give a child a shot to protect the grandparents just doesn't make sense. And then you ask about these COVID variants. Well, what we see is that when if you've had a coronavirus or another cold symptom, we have this idea of cross-reactivity. That if you've been exposed to another coronavirus or another type of virus that's similar, you'll get a tremendous amount of cross-reactivity, up to 20% in terms of variants. So none of the variants we're seeing now really are going to have any effect on someone who's had COVID and has natural immunity. And natural immunity is, I've written here that it's natural immunity is robust. It means it's very strong. It's cross-reactive. It means it will protect you from other viruses, and it's long-lasting. But if you give that person the shot who has natural immunity, it will actually interfere with their immunity. It actually redirects it. It narrows it down. It focuses on what the shot is trying to get it to see and ignore what's around it. And if you have natural immunity, so let's say you had COVID, last year, you're immune and you cannot pass it, at least according to the CDC's records, you cannot pass it on to other people. So here's what we're looking at. Children with COVID have mild to no symptoms. They rarely get ill. The death rate is 0. If children die under 20 with a diagnosis of COVID because of a positive PCR test, it's because they had other severe illnesses. It doesn't leave damage behind. Their lungs are good afterwards. They catch it from adults. They don't catch it from other children. They don't transmit it to adults. and treatment is available to improve their outcome. So now the question comes, why does my child need a vaccine? Well, the COVID vaccine was designed to try to imitate nature by taking a spike protein, an artificial one created in the lab, and then bundling that up. You could then, or then presenting that to the human body, you could create an allergic or an immune response to it. So what they did is they took messenger RNA, and that comes in through the vaccine, goes into your own cells, and actually hijacks your cell's own ability to create spike proteins. All right? Those spike proteins get out into the blood, and then your immune system goes, oh, this is something foreign that is dangerous, and I need to create an immune response to it. And that's what it would do. So what it means is that your own system is creating spike proteins to artificially simulate what happens in a natural infection. The only trouble is that it doesn't really work like that. And I'm going to pass this over now to Dr. Nagase to take it on and tell a little about what this messenger RNA vaccine really does when it comes into your blood. Thank you very much.
There's a little bit of a hum from one of the speakers out there. I wonder if the soundboard guy can turn down that channel. Sorry, it's just the musician in me that... Okay, well, we'll continue. So what do these injections do in reality? So let's go here. Admitted by CNN, these injections cannot prevent transmission. Now, before we even start talking about the so-called COVID vaccines, let's look at something that came before this, which was the flu vaccine. And not just any flu vaccine, specifically the injection flu vaccines. If you get something that is injected into the blood, the body says, hey, there's an abnormal thing in the blood. Let's take care of this problem that appears in the blood. So you get antibodies that are in the blood. If a problem first appears in your nose, in the lining of your respiratory tract, in the back of your throat, your body remembers that and says, hey, this problem first appeared in the nose, in the throat, or in the airways of the lung. And it doesn't just produce antibodies in the blood, it produces antibodies that line that soft, wet skin on the inside of your nose, the back of your throat, and the insides of your lungs. Those are called IgA antibodies. So your body produces antibodies at the point of entry. So let's think back to the flu seasons, where you had public health going around saying, take the flu vaccine, take the flu vaccine. It's going to prevent transmission. Well, unless you're bleeding everywhere, upon everyone you see, you aren't going to prevent any transmission by having antibodies in the blood. In order to prevent transmission, you have to have IgA antibodies that are present on all the mucosal surfaces of your body. So that's the inside of your nose, back of your throat, throughout your entire digestive system, and throughout the lining or the epithelial skin inside your lungs. So nothing injected can produce the types of antibodies you want that actually prevent transmission. And ironically, it was around about 2014 and 2015, there was one flu vaccine that was a nasal spray. And guess what? They took that off the market. The only flu vaccine that could actually prevent transmission was taken off the market. And then about 2014, Vancouver Coastal Health tried to mandate mandatory flu vaccinations for all the staff. Fortunately, at that time in 2014, the BC Nurses Union successfully fought off Vancouver Coastal Health Authority and their public health doctors who came ignorant policy that somehow they were going to prevent flu transmission in the hospital by giving people antibodies in the blood. So, now fast forward to COVID-19. We are taking an injection that causes the production of spike proteins in the blood. So you're going to have antibodies in the blood. So that means the only time you're going to prevent transmission is if you are transmitting coronaviruses by spreading your blood everywhere. Usually that's a sign of a bigger problem. That's an emergency problem.
Bled to death, but he died of
So,
COVID.
this phenomenon of shedding was very controversial at first. Controversial because of the denial by public health doctors that these so-called spike proteins produced by the COVID vaccines could shed. Well, if you look back here, if a whole coronavirus, that entire little circle with the little t's surrounding it, can be multiplied and spread through the air, what are the chances of one small part of that virus multiplying and being spread through the air as well? In fact, the spike proteins will travel a lot farther on air currents than an entire coronavirus, because the spike proteins are orders of magnitude smaller. So shedding is a certainty. Anyone with any knowledge of cell biology would have known that. And yet you had public health doctors denying it, at least until they could deny it no more. There is no off button. So the problem with mRNA injections is that human bodies have something called mammalian reverse transcriptase. That's a special enzyme that's not often used in the body, but seems to be in occurrence and active in children and developing cells at a much higher rate than they are in adults. So children and embryos have much higher activity of the reverse transcriptase enzyme. And what the reverse transcriptase enzyme does is it can take anything that's mRNA and reverse transcribe it to DNA. And once something has been reverse transcribed into DNA, it's just a matter of chance whether or not that segment of DNA, which was a copy of the mRNA, gets integrated into the cell. If that DNA, which is a DNA copy of that mRNA coding for a spike protein, gets integrated into the DNA of that cell has been permanently changed for the entire life of that cell. If it's a skin cell or an epithelial cell that's replaced every 30 to 90 days, it's a small problem. But if the DNA is permanently changed in a cell that has to live 10 years, 20 years, or your entire lifetime, then that's a big problem. Because not only can that cell randomly start producing spike proteins again, that cell also has a mutation. That is a segment of DNA that's not supposed to be there, that wasn't there before when you were born, suddenly randomly inserted somewhere along its sequence. So not only is it a cancer problem, it's an intermittent spike protein producing problem. Does anyone want to be a spike protein factory for the rest of their lives?
No.
That is the exact risk that mRNA injections have. This risk has been known from the inception of this type of gene therapy injection. So what's the big problem with spike proteins? Because you're going to make antibodies to it anyway, correct? Well, it turns out that spike proteins themselves are mutagenic. That is, they cause mutations. They even figured out how spike proteins cause mutations. Spike proteins inhibit DNA repair enzymes. When you go out and about into the world, you're exposed to all sorts of stressors. Too much heat, too much sun, too much alcohol. And with these toxins, you get metabolic stress on the cell. And sometimes that causes DNA damage. But luckily, all the cells in your body have enzymes that go through the DNA and inspect the DNA for damage, and if they find damage, they repair that damage. Spike proteins block the enzymes that detect errors in DNA, and it blocks the enzymes that repair DNA. This has been proven as of October 13th of this year. So, the spike proteins are a proven mutagen. They lead to DNA damage. So here's the issue. What if you already had COVID, and then you get this mRNA injection? So with the natural COVID infection, your body produces antibodies. It produces antibodies to all the different parts of the virus. The little red T's, the blue circles, the white dots, the little specks on the middle of that dot, it produces antibodies to everything. Now all of a sudden, after getting natural immunity, where you have antibodies to that entire little coronavirus, you get a spike protein injection with the mRNA vaccines. Your body's like, what the hell happened? We thought we got rid of this spike protein already. What is it doing back here? And now you have a problem. Because the body, the first time around, did an immune response that was, for most people, just right. Got rid of the virus without going overboard. Now, all of a sudden, a problem that your body thought it had fixed comes back again. Now your body is bringing out the sledgehammers. Because the problem it thought it got rid of reappeared, so it has to try harder to kill that problem. So then you get out of control inflammation. Instead of just getting rid of the spike protein, the body destroys everything, trying to find the source. Why that problem that it thought it had got rid of had reappeared. So now I'd like to hand off to Dr. Charles Hoff.
I wanted to speak to you on the topic of vaccine injuries. Because I'm a general practitioner from Lytton in the interior, and I have seen firsthand in my own patients the awful things that these COVID shots do. I have 10 people, I have a small rural practice, and I have 10 people who are now appear to be permanently disabled from their COVID shot. It upset me very much. And I set out to try and find out what went wrong. I sent a letter to our medical health officer for the Thompson-Nicola region to ask, what is the mechanism of injury for these patients? And as their doctor, how should I be treating this? And of course I got no answer, because how would they know? This is an experiment. No idea. I sent in vaccine injury reporting forms. I've sent 14 so far. And every single one has been returned saying, no, this is not from the vaccine, these are just all coincidences. So I've got an important announcement to make. That these COVID shots are the commonest cause of coincidences known to medical science. sadly, the medical authorities are vaccine injury deniers. It defies logic and it defies science. Now, this slide that you can see is from the VAERS, that's the Vaccine Injury Reporting System from the US. Canada doesn't have a vaccine, well, it pretends to have a vaccine injury reporting system, but it gets censored. It takes you about 25 minutes to fill out one of those 9-page forms. You send it in and they say, look, this is not from the vaccine, without ever speaking to the patient, without examining them, without any investigation. They just arbitrarily deny that it's a vaccine injury. So I don't know if it's worth sending any more in. It's fruitless. It just gets censored, and then they tell you that this shot is safe and effective. This is not science, it is nonsense. So as you can see from these are the VAERS numbers that you can see up on the screen. These are the numbers for the US, and we know that less than 1% of vaccine injuries actually ever get reported. But as you can see in the top left-hand corner, 19,500 people have died so far in the US from these shots. Now these were people who died suddenly and unexpectedly shortly after their shot. These were people who didn't have any condition that they should have died from. And they just dropped dead. I had one patient in my medical practice, 72-year-old fellow. His only medical condition was COPD. He used one of those blue Ventolin puffers that people with asthma or lung issues sometimes use. That was his only medication, and that was his only medical problem. He had his COVID shot. He complained to his wife that he felt short of breath all the time. And 3 weeks after his shot, he was sitting on he'd been out for dinner to a restaurant with his wife. He was sitting on the side of the bed and he just keeled over and died. Sent in his vaccine injury reporting form, and they told me it was a coincidence. So those 19,500 people dead, since the start of this vaccine rollout, 50% of those died within 2 days of their shot. 80% within 5 days. And the whole lot within 21 days, 3 weeks. That's where they cut it off. But there are many others that die after that. And sadly, most doctors in emergency rooms will say, no, this is a coincidence. They're so desperate for this vaccine to work that they don't want to admit that it's not working and that it is killing people. And now they're coming for our children. It is now being shown that children are 100 times more likely to die from the shot than they are from COVID. 100 times more likely to die from the shot than from COVID. And they're coming for our children. One of the numbers that's not shown on there, well, you can see the second box, the top in the middle, 99,000 people with vaccine injuries severe enough to end up in hospital. And one of the numbers that's not on there is 950,000 injuries, almost 1 million reported vaccine injuries. And remember, that's only about 1%. So you've got to multiply that by 100. These shots are not safe. Maybe I'll just tell you a little bit of investigation that I did in my own practice. When our local medical health officer could not give me any answers as to what the mechanism of injury was, I sent a letter to Dr. Bonnie Henry. Back in April, some of you might remember it, beginning of April. And I asked many of the same questions. Please tell me, what is the mechanism of injury, and as these people's doctor, how should I be treating it? I also asked her the foundational medical ethics question. When we're testing some new experimental treatment As soon as your treatment shows evidence of harm, you're supposed to stop the experiment. It's called medical ethics. It's based on the Hippocratic oath of do no harm. So I asked her, is it ethical to continue the experiment? And of course, I got no answer. So I consulted with scientists, and I did a lot of research myself, but I spoke to scientists from around the world, and it has now been revealed that unlike conventional vaccines, 75% of the COVID shot goes into your bloodstream. Vaccines normally stay in the muscle, which is where the work happens of making antibodies. It's not supposed to go around your entire body. But it has now been shown that literally within 15 minutes, these shots are going around your body. And 75% of it goes everywhere. Which means it goes into your brain and into every organ in your body. So these COVID shots, as you might know, unlike conventional vaccines, which contain an altered bacteria or virus, they are little packages of synthetically produced genetic material called messenger RNA. It's a gene to enable your body to manufacture trillions of spike proteins. And the other doctors have told you that these spike proteins are toxic. They damage your body's immune system, and they cause blood clots. So because these little packages of RNA are now circulating around your entire body, they are designed, because they're in a little capsule, to be absorbed. They can get absorbed right through a cell membrane, and they're designed to be able to do that. And so the only place that they can go is into the lining of your blood vessels, because they're in your bloodstream. And the place where absorption occurs from the bloodstream is in the capillary networks. That's the networks of fine blood vessels like you have in your lungs, in your brain, in all of your organs, because those are where you've got the biggest surface area relative to the blood volume, and that's where the blood slows right down. So that's where absorption happens. So all of these little packages of messenger RNA get absorbed into the cells around your blood vessels and into those cells. So once it's inside those cells, the package is open, the RNA is released, your body recognizes this as a gene, and the purpose of genes is to make proteins. So your body then sets to work manufacturing trillions of these poisonous spikes, these little spike proteins. Now normally, these spike proteins form part of the viral capsule. That's the membrane around a virus. But the problem is, it's not in a virus. It's in your cells. So these little spikes will then get incorporated into the cell wall, because that's what they're designed to do. They're part of a cell wall. The problem is, of the cells where they're in the cells around your blood vessels. Which means that the little spikes that usually stick out of a coronavirus are now sticking into your blood vessels. The worst possible place that they could be, because the lining of your blood vessels is then no longer smooth. And when a platelet comes along and hits all these spikes, it is absolutely inevitable that a blood clot will form. Because that is what blood platelets, that's what God designed blood platelets to do, to recognize damaged vessels and block the vessel to stop the bleeding. Amen. So, I needed to find out if this theory could be true. These clots are too small to be seen on any scan. They are microscopic. Or any kind of medical imaging can show something that small. So the only way to know if these thousands or millions of microscopic clots were being triggered by these spikes was to do a blood test called a D-dimer. And the D-dimer is a commonly done blood test in emergency rooms to see if a person has blood clots somewhere in their body. It doesn't tell you where, it just tells you if blood clotting has occurred. So I started doing these D-dimer tests on my own patients who had had their shot within the previous 7 days, and found that more than 50% of them had blood clotting. Now, these are not vaccine-injured people. These were people who thought their shot was fine. They had no problems. But the biggest problem with this is not just that they had microscopic blood clots, but a clotted vessel is permanently blocked. Those clots never go away. Those vessels are permanently damaged. And the damage will accumulate with every successive vaccine or booster. It will add and add and add. So I now have 6, so that fellow that I told you about that dropped dead when he was talking to his wife, sitting on the side of the bed, he complained of being short of breath. I have 6 other people in my practice who tell me that they cannot walk as far as they used to. I think they got thousands of tiny, tiny blood clots in their lungs. And lung tissue does not regenerate, just as heart tissue does not regenerate. And brain does not regenerate. I have 3 people in my medical practice who have weakness of both hands so that they cannot open a jar. I have one lady who cannot open a door handle if it is a round doorknob. She has had to change the handles in her house to a lever-type handle so that she can open the doors. Her shot was 10 months ago. There is no improvement. So to get symmetrical weakness in both hands, you have to have got these clots in your spinal cord. These shots are deadly. And these people who are now vaccine injured are now considered unvaccinated because they refuse to have more of what disabled them. They refuse to go for shot number 2, so now they are being punished, like so many of the rest of us, for refusing to have another clot shot. This is cruel and unethical. This is a graph to show the death rate from vaccines over the previous years. The VAERS system in the US has been there for 30 years. And you can see all the years, goes back 30 years, and you can see a very, very low death rate. And this is all vaccines. Until you hit 2021 when the vaccine rollout started. Just look what happens to the line. You know, it's a flat line until you hit the COVID vaccines. So these shots, which we are told are safe and effective, have broken all records for being the most dangerous and lethal vaccines in history. And now they're coming for our children. It is time to stand up and say no. These are just a couple of slides about the very, very brief and inadequate trials that were done on children. I mean, they are pathetic. They are absolutely pathetic. You know, to do a trial on any new experimental product for a couple of months is ridiculous. We have absolutely no idea what the long-term consequences of this are going to be. We have no idea what this is going to do to fertility. Autopsy studies on vaccine-injured patients have shown that these spikes are in every organ of the body, but they accumulate particularly in the ovaries. So the fertility risk for young girls could be devastating. And there are many women who have noticed that after they're shot, their periods either disappear or become very heavy or go crazy. It's because their ovaries have been poisoned full of these spikes. And now they're coming for our children. So fertility studies, all of the reassurances from the authorities that these will not affect fertility are absolutely absurd. Fertility studies take many, many years because the factors that affect fertility are so complex. They're not just all the factors that control a woman's reproductive cycle, but all the factors necessary for maintaining a pregnancy are incredibly complex. And so there's no possible way that any doctor or scientist can just say that some completely new product that had never been tried on humans before this pandemic, was not tried on animals, will not affect fertility. It is nothing more than a guess. It is just simply not true. This was a quote from Dr. Eric Rubin, the editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine, saying we're never going to learn how safe this vaccine is. He was talking about it for children until we try it. In other words, they're coming to experiment on our children. And the experiment on the adults has not gone very well. This is a tragic slide showing the faces of a whole lot of young people who have died from this. The D-dimer studies that I did on my patients, the youngest I've managed to do it on yet is a 17-year-old boy who got blood clotting, very keen on soccer. Tragic. He was fervent that he was going to have this shot because he wanted to be like his friends. And I did a D-dimer before his shot to find out what his baseline was, and afterwards I had to phone him up and say, it happened. And all I can do is tell him to take aspirin for 6 weeks. What else can you do? Once the shot's in, you cannot get it out. It's not like taking a blood pressure pill. If it gives you some side effects, we'll just change to another pill. Once you get this shot in, you cannot get it out. It is an irreversible decision. And that is the seriousness of giving an experimental product to our children without knowing what the long-term consequences are. This is absurd, and it is completely irresponsible. I think what I'm going to do is maybe we'll just turn this time over to a question period. We would like our focus to be particularly on children. Now, I'm sure many of you have got questions about these things which pertain to adults, but much of it pertains to children too. But they are coming for our children, and that is why we're doing this tour. The future of Canada is at stake. If they sterilize our children, what does the future hold? These children that get myocarditis, and they tell us that myocarditis is very rare. Just as I've been doing this D-dimer test on people who don't think they were vaccine injured and found that more than 50% are. You could do a blood test called a troponin, which is the blood test we do as emergency physicians to see if you've had a heart attack. It detects damage to heart muscle. When they've done that to children, they found that about 1 in 300 actually gets myocarditis. So myocarditis is an inflammation of the heart muscle. And the problem with heart muscle is it cannot regenerate. Once it is damaged, that's it. That person will then live a shorter life. That person will never be able to exert themselves the way they could before. there is no such thing as mild myocarditis. It is permanent heart damage. The only difference is degree. So do you want a mildly damaged heart or a badly damaged heart? I don't think you want any damage to your heart. So let's open this to questions now. Perhaps you... Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, all of the doctors, and I just want to say how much on behalf of British and Canadians, because you guys have just become quite famous at this point, deeply, deeply appreciative we are of all that you do. We just thank you. Thank you so much on behalf of our children and our families. Question and answer. You can come up to this mic, okay? We would like the questions to, at least, I know everybody's got lots of questions, and we went through way more than we ever thought we would go last night. So we ask you to be succinct. If you can relate them to children or a quick comment on something, that would be just to help us, because otherwise I don't think we ended till about 11 o'clock last night. So one other point of order, unlike all the community groups that our Prime Minister gifted with your tax dollars to convince their children in community groups, basketball coaches to the tune of $10,000 each to convince all the kids on their team to get vaccinated, he doesn't give us any money. I know, shocking, isn't it? Yeah. So we will do the typical pass the bucket. Please be generous. The only reason why we can bring this to your community and all the other communities is because everybody is helping us, okay? We are in a war, people, and it's now or never. So please help us to make this successful. Be generous. If you don't want to do anything today, there are envelopes on the back with information on just to how to donate to the Canadian Voters Association, which all the monies generated over the course of the doctor's tour go to supporting, getting the word out to save the kids. So thank you. Okay, so you can line up here, just kind of go that way. We got somebody who's just been waiting all this time for a question. If you can sort of go that way and not go in front of the camera, that would be really, really helpful. All right. Thank you for being... I want you guys all to know, this is what we need to do more often, be the first ones up to the mic, okay? On town hall meetings and all the rest of it. And I applaud everybody in the front row too, because that is so brilliant. The other side is trained to take over the first 5 rows and then destroy our opportunity to be heard. So, bravo. All right, I'm going to give this back to you.
As a parent of 2 children, aged, As a parent of 2 children, aged 14 and 11, a boy and a girl respectively, how do we get a copy of this to show our children? Because we talked to them about it, they kind of know the generalities of it, but we'd like to show them something more concrete. And B, what are the effects on our children who are unvaccinated with all their schoolmates who are now getting vaccinated?
Yeah, we have a little trouble because those questions are so interesting because we don't know. Sometimes we get into a brawl as to who gets to answer it. But I'm just going to take this off for a second so we can pass it around. Yeah, so there's a couple of important questions. One is, if you have a child that goes along with you, or you protect that child from getting the shot, they're going to come up under a great deal of pressure in school, right? And you know, children like to do what their peers are doing, and this is a real problem. This is why you get 100% more, an increased vaccination rate if you do it in the gymnasium. Now the risk here is your child's going to go to school, you're going to have written a letter that says, do not give my child the COVID shot. And then that child may come home with a Band-Aid on his or her arm.
Not mine. They know
Depends on your
me,
kids.
and
You know,
they've been forthright with all their peers, we're not doing it.
you know, that's the thing is, these kids are incredible, aren't they? I mean, wow. I think if the adults in Canada stood up like these kids do again, you know, we would not be in this fix. But what I'm trying to get at is that we need to be proactive. We have to think ahead. We have to make sure that we've spoken to the people at our school boards, that we've made them promise or given them notice of liability, or we just don't let our kids go to school. If we think there's going to be a shot given out this week, we just keep that child at home. We go on a vacation in the backyard. Okay? In other words, we may be in this for a little while yet before we turn the tables. And it may be that you're going to have to take your child out of school for a month. Or maybe you're going to start creating an alternative method of education. It could be homeschooling, it could be a pod. You know, we have lots of kids who are the same line come out. I do applaud those kids that can go to school and don't wear a mask when everyone else is wearing them. And they're strong enough to say, I'm not going to do what I'm told if I think it's wrong. So I think that's answering part of your question.
Thank you.
Is the second half to do with exposure to the children that have been given the shot?
Yeah.
And transmission
Yeah.
or shedding?
Yep.
Yeah, that is a tough one because it's something we don't know a lot about. It's a definite phenomenon. It's happened around the world. There's just so many people, thousands and thousands, who reported this, that unvaxxed people, when exposed to people that have recently had the vaccine, the COVID shot, develop symptoms which are very strange. A lot of them are to do with menstrual things, like bleeding, so on, but some people will have dizziness, they'll be faint, they'll have fevers, they'll have loose stools, they'll almost feel like they have radiation poisoning. And we don't know the mechanism of that. It could be that people are shedding, as Dr. Nagase was saying, they may be shedding particles of protein. It's possible that other people inhale, exposed to, and that causes them sickness. And it could be a transmission, almost like a radio transmission, a little bit like we see with radiation poisoning. So the question comes up: what to do about that? In other words, how do we do it to stop us from becoming divided into the vax and the non-vax? Because this is a very important question. Divide and conquer has always been used by the enemy, right? Divide us and then conquer us. And so we have to find a way to solve this problem of the hostility between the two groups, of the threat we might feel that we have for them and they have for us, right? And this idea that we can transmit or shed, they can do that to those of us that have not had the shots, is a definite threat that we have to figure our way around, and a way of dividing us that we have to figure our way around. So I would say that if you're at high risk, if you're a pregnant person, if you're a pregnant woman, pregnant person, I mean, right? It's a pregnant woman. I'm getting so PC. Maybe I had some shedding. But anyway, so if someone is highly susceptible or at risk, a woman who's going to get pregnant or is pregnant, a small child perhaps, an infant, anyone you think is of high risk, then you should say, hey, love your neighbor, but maybe keep your door closed, okay? And I think that may be the best way of doing it. In other words, don't hate them or dislike them, still love them, but realize that caution is important in those cases. The rest of us, we're working hard to try to find a way that we can overcome some of these obstacles. And so we're trying to study the science. What's the cause for the shedding phenomenon? What can people do? Can they put a dab of ivermectin on their wrist and go to work and it actually blocks that? We don't know, but we're working at it.
We do take IBM.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next question.
Hello, my name is Maureen. Taller people, unite. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello. Thank you so much for doing everything you're doing. I so applaud your courage. A little bit of background.
that in order to stay where she was living, which was a hospital and a nursing care facility, she had to get the COVID shots. So she gets her second jab, and 2 days later she has the stroke that ultimately kills her. But it was a coincidence, totally a coincidence. She may have had throat cancer at the same time, and that's why she couldn't swallow and blah, blah, blah. So I've been fairly passionate about this, but my son goes to high school locally and wants to compete in the Canadian Improv Games, and in order to do that and enter the theaters, he has to be double vaxxed. So now he's feeling pressure and desperately wants this vaccine, and the only reason he hasn't gotten it so far is because he respects me, he says, and he loves me, and he knows how passionate I am about this. I am furious that my child has been put in this position. Absolutely furious. I'm furious that I have been put in this position and that I have to be the one who's standing between my child and what he is most passionate about right now in life. The only thing that really has him passionate about school. He's hated school up until now. So there's that. What I really want to know is, because over and over as I advocate for people, don't do it, don't do it. I know of lots of people who have vaccine injuries. I've seen the videos where perfectly healthy soccer players drop dead suddenly, and teenagers who've been formerly athletes just suddenly dying, literally on the field. So as I'm advocating for this, people are going, yeah, but why on earth would the government do that? Why would they try to kill us? Why would they try to, make us infertile? I don't know anything about the medical system, and I am just a mere plebe in the giant cog system, and I don't know why anyone would do this to us. I don't understand it any better than they do, and I suspect that I will probably never really know the truth because I'm not destined to know. Given that you are insiders in the medical system, do you have any theories as to why they would be forcing this down our throats when we are saying no?
I've recently come across a book that answers all your questions, and I want everybody to take a pen out and write it down. All the data that we've given you, a lot of the theories of why this is happening, more or less follow the money. So the book is The Real Anthony Fauci. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. In terms of the previous lady, there are graphs in that book as well that you can go through with your child. It's actually very informative, 100%. And I think that's something that needs to spread beyond this, like what we have here, but also, we need to push back. This is bigger than just the vaccine. So follow the money, the corruption.
David likes the answer.
What's that?
David likes the answer. He just connects all the dots.
Perfect.
He puts it perfectly together. What's the real purpose of what this whole thing solves? And it's playing out on the table.
But what's frightening is that this is not just happening in Canada or the US. This is happening all over the planet. So there's no place that I can escape to.
So I'm going to answer that for you because it's not a medical answer. So these guys have to defer to me for a change, all right? So for everybody, if you join up with the Canadian Voters Association, you'll be getting lots of information about this here in the next few weeks. So there are a number of things, because everybody is asking that question. This is not about your health and well-being, you guys. This is about disabling society. If we have a weak and sick society, you will be diverted. Your attentions will be elsewhere. They won't be on politics or what's transpiring out of Victoria. I saw how many hands don't watch TV. That's good and bad. I know, I hate to tell you that. But if you're part of the CVA and you at least take my emails, then I'll let you away with not knowing what's really going on, okay? So here's just some of the highlights. I'm not going to go into it because I don't want to spend too much time on this. This is about the kids' vaccine, but it's also about their future. And I have my 17th grandchild is on the way. Okay? Yeah, I don't know how that happened. Yeah. my kids, I know they're probably watching. We'll talk one day, okay? But you know, it's their future, it's our future, and this is our nation. And we have the right to determine whether or not they will live in a free and democratic society where the government cannot force medical experiments into their bodies. We have the same. So what's coming down, and I will finish up tonight with a few other things, but here's a few things that's coming down. Trudeau has started a program called the super clusters. I know, it sounds weird. He's selling it to the people as this is going to be the Silicon Valleys of Canada, and they're being established. But when you look at the grant programs, and I'm going to be putting all this out public, when you look at the grant programs, those grants include the collection of big data. Everything about you under the guise of, oh, we have to save the population from COVID, including smart underwear, fabric with high frequency sensors so they can monitor your vitals. And it's all attached to an AI platform. We have the grants. This is your money being used for these kinds of things. Increasing, they say, passive surveillance. Stores, airports, computer screens, okay? All in the grants. These are people who got your money to facilitate this, okay? It goes on, another expose that we're going to be doing that probably will be the ruination of Bonnie Henry if people stand up and say enough is enough. The government involved a program called BIG. It's called Behavioral Insights Group. And this group has been paid for with your tax money to train 6,500 government employees on how to use behavioral science against you. So when they say we're following the science, they are. They're not lying. It's how to manipulate you into complying with their agenda. Okay? All coming your way, right off the government websites. We just know how to dig on this stuff. So, big data, where the vices are, who's the troublemakers. You know, the 20%, and I think the number is bigger of who didn't get vaxxed, is really like 60% of power in Canada, because we said no. So stop asking why, and just look at what's happening. Since when does a healthy society fire doctors like this? When do they intentionally disable and make sick your children? What are we doing? We are causing a health crisis. Why? Because your loved ones will be first on your agenda, not what is happening politically. Okay? Be wise, be awake, and stay strong. So, good question, but it should be to the doctors. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
You asked the question about children that are being deprived of opportunities to play hockey or to do, go dancing or various things like that, and they need this vax shot, the clot shot, in order to do that. Or they want to just be like their friends. So one of the things that I think we really need to explain to people, these shots are lethal. There is no doubt about that. The evidence is clear. So, is it worth gambling your life and your health and your future so that you can play hockey? Is it worth gambling? This is like Russian roulette. You don't know who's going to get nailed next. Your life and your health, you only get one life and you only get one body. And once your health is ruined by with some irreversible damage, it's too late to say I shouldn't have done that. So people need to realize that once this shot is in, you cannot get it out. So that is what I think we need to explain to our children who are going to miss dancing lessons or even if it means not going to the next year of study at university. Take a break. Give it a year. Maybe enough people will be dead by that point that Canada will say no more, and then they can go back to university.
I just wanted to speak to people, and I want people to start thinking very, very analytically. And one thing I want people to be aware of is the problem, reaction, solution. I suspect we're being set up for another problem, reaction, solution. We know the problem, reaction, solution that we've just gone through. The problem was COVID. It wasn't really much of a problem, but the media made it into a big problem. The reaction was everyone was scared. And the solution that they had waiting in the wings for years before this problem appeared, it's all in the patent literature, their solution was an injection. But that's what already happened. Think about what the next problem, reaction, solution might be. If people start dying en masse, actually it's no longer an if, now that people are starting to die en masse, heart attack rates are up, stroke rates are up, children, populations that have no significant incidence of strokes or heart attacks are now being advertised on buses saying children have strokes too. I have never seen that once in my career. So we have to think ahead and think what kind of reaction is going to come about when the problem, a real problem this time, of people dying and suffering comes to light. Well, the most likely reaction is going to be rage. People who've been deceived into taking this injection. And we have to be aware of what kind of solution they have planned. How many people out here are wearing a Fitbit? Okay. What about a smartwatch that takes your heart rate? Okay. What about having had a telephone appointment or a Zoom appointment with your doctor? You're already being trained to get your health care from a machine. I repeat, you are already being trained to get your health care from a machine. And the reaction and the solution they have waiting in the wings, at least as far as I can speculate based on knowledge and logic, is that they want to be able to say, see, look at these doctors. Look at these doctors here who didn't tell you this injection was dangerous. Look at the public health authorities. They pushed it on you and they didn't tell you it was dangerous. Look at the politicians. Look at the entire healthcare system. The entire healthcare system and every person in it didn't warn you about the dangers. You can't trust them anymore. So now, who are you going to trust? A computer? I heard that, right? A computer that can stay up 24 hours a day, who can read more medical information than any living human could because it's a computer. They will sell you on the idea of its convenience. You can call up that AI 24 hours a day. But it will be a mystery. No one knows what an AI is thinking. I suspect that might be the solution that is waiting in the wings for us across this whole planet. And if you look into it, because I did have a Zoom chat, a private Zoom chat with some people from the IT industry, and interestingly enough, the IT health industry in Alberta with Alberta Health Services. And a couple years ago, they had a conference sponsored by Dassault. Dassault is the French-European fighter jet maker, but they make a lot more than fighter jets. They make general industrial arms. They're basically a military industrial complex of their own. And they have an entire department devoted to virtual care through an AI. Why is a military company investing billions, maybe even trillions, in healthcare? It's not to help you live. Their entire business is war.
Well, that just sends shivers down your spine. Next question, please.
There's no hope in this world other than through Jesus Christ. I just want to encourage you to tell your kids the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And the lie is that all kids are getting the vaccine. They're not. I got 10 kids. None of them are getting it. 5 of them are here tonight. Tell them the truth. But the question,
can I just say something on that?
Sure.
You know, that's what we need to form is groups of children to give them the sense that they're not alone. And if that we've already started thinking about that online, kids can go online because they're actually more easy, they do that so easily, you know, and get into groups where they can speak with other kids. It will bolster them up. They'll start to realize their mother and their fathers are actually telling them the truth because other kids will be saying the same thing. And we need to create those community of kids. And that's the way we can help that child who can't play hockey this year. In fact, in Ontario, they did it. They got a bunch of kids together. They created their own hockey league. So let us do the same for our kids.
Show them the notes and the videos from tonight. My 13-year-old son's here. I want them to know. Let them know the whole truth. And don't expect them to get that at school. They're being indoctrinated at school. So pull them out. Do something different. You know, their life is more important than whatever education you can give them. But my question is this. Like, I'm amazed at the number of doctors that I know that are good, church-going, friendly, smart guys who are promoting this evil medical tyranny, who are either saying nothing or worse yet, promoting it, even going on social media and bragging that they're eager to give this shot to their own kids. Can you explain that? How does that fit? Like, are they really that ignorant to some of these obvious things, or are they just really part of this evil agenda? Or are they just that afraid of the technocrats?
There's a lot of different reasons behind why doctors are promoting this or not standing up to confront these, I would say, evil forces. You know, some of the doctors are getting the shots themselves. They're getting double vaxxed and they feel that's the best thing. So they are completely programmed.
Or is it a show? Are they just showing it?
No. These doctors are actually going getting the shots. So, although there are fake shots and all that sort of stuff, but these doctors actually are promoting the shot because they believe in them. And you know, as medical doctors, we've been told since, for me, it's how many years now? 43 years. We've been told that vaccines are safe and effective. We've been programmed. And we had to be programmed because doctors are those that can stand up and lead, right? We have the scientific knowledge, we are able to read the research, and people trust us. So doctors had to be put down. They had to be put down deep in a state of slumber trance. And that's what happened. That's why doctors they don't
How do they get there? Medical school?
But that's why in the emergency room they're having that problem.
I think you have to look at doctors as not any different than anybody else. So right now what's happening is you look at Canada-wide, there's a lack of critical thinking, right? So you're fed information and you don't critically think about it and you just follow what the mandates are. To be totally honest, people think that physicians are different, they're not. Okay, so there's a proportion of physicians that just follow the rules and don't critically think. They're fed the information by big pharma, and they prescribe. Then there's a proportion of the population that are coerced, right? They feel they have to. And I would say there's a proportion of physicians, similar, okay, that actually have been coerced, meaning that to continue working in a hospital environment, they actually got the shot. These are the great ones that didn't, but you have to remember, if you're 30 years old and you've got that from medical school and you feel like you need to keep working. And then the rarity, and obviously, people here are part of that small percentage, are people that are actually critically thinking or believe in a bigger thing than the big pharma or follow the money, right? They have different values. So I think that's...
Thank you all for coming.
Hello. My apologies, my question isn't regarding children, but I think it should be brief. I believe Dr. Nagase, you stated that the concept of shedding is a certainty. Do you mean in particular the concept of shedding the spike protein, or just the fact that a vaccinated individual can spread the illness somehow? So if that's the case, then I wonder if any of you are familiar with the work of Dr. Stefan Lanka or Dr. Andrew Kaufman or Dr. Tom Cowan and the history of virology surrounding John Ender's experiments. And so just the idea that a viral pathogen as the cause of disease has never actually been proven. So I wonder if any of you could speak to that and also just answer the simple question, could say, if a vaccinated individual spread the spike protein to me, could I spread that spike protein to others?
Yeah, so this is a kind of a change in the paradigm. A lot of people think a virus is something which is an enemy out there coming to attack you. But there's another view that we've never actually found viruses make people sick. That they may be actually coming out of the body of people who are usually toxic, that the cells are expelling something that looks like a virus under electron microscope. And this could actually be an attempt to get rid of something. It could be that viruses are small particles. They can't live by themselves. They require a host that are surrounding us in the zillions of trillions. And they're actually upgrades of information. It's a bit like we're a computer, and that we're getting these upgrades all the time. People we know that expel these viruses, that we have them in the world around us. And that when we are exposed to them, they're an upgrade. They help us to adapt to the environment. Now, if the environment is very unhealthy, we need a lot of adaptation. And if we're not healthy, let's say we don't have enough vitamin D in our bodies, we may have trouble making that adaptation to upgrading our little computers, right? And so what happens then, it's like an old car that you put super octane gas in, and it's crunching and having trouble going because it's trying to adjust, right? And so that's the thought of why people have symptoms. It's more to do with the upgrade adjustment than actually the attack by an enemy. So those are two different views, and I suspect that we're going to be shifting to a different type of paradigm, which is more important than how the person's terrain, how well they are before they're exposed to these upgrades, which are good. They keep us alive, they keep us in harmony with our environment. That we're going to be spending more time looking at our own nutrition and our general lifestyle and the ability to avoid having negative emotions and to be more loving. All those things are going to become more important to us than the pill.
So, do you think I can spread the spike protein if I get it from a vaccinated individual?
We don't know what you're spreading. Right? That's the problem. We haven't identified it. Now, we're talking about something which is not a simple spike protein. We're talking about a toxin. Right? So if I had arsenic and I was sprinkling it around, everyone might get sick from it. So it's a little bit different. Hopefully that will give you some idea.
Thank you so much. And is there any, I see you're filming, where can we see this? Will it be in an email or something?
We'll address it.
Cool.
Yeah,
thank you so much. I appreciate everything you're doing. You guys are very inspiring.
Thank you. That was a good question. Because we are, we're shifting here. We're moving out of the old paradigm, which is based on pharmaceuticals almost entirely, into a new paradigm where we take back control of our health and the health of our families and children and our grandchildren. But to do that, we have to step up right now, and we have to protect the future. And that's what we're here to help you to do.
So I know there's lots of questions on where this video is, and I'm going to cut questions off after you, okay? Now, to be honest, people snuck in after I laid down the law, but I'm watching. We still let them ask the questions though, okay? So if anybody takes a while to get brave and courageous, but just, again, be succinct. If you can stick around for the kids, that would be, great. And I'm going to ask that question. That's probably the most important one. Just so you know about getting and obtaining a copy of the video, I will be telling you at the end of this evening where you can get that, how you can share it, and a couple of other things we need you to do. So before you ask your question, though, I have an important question. So, as we're all concerned about...
Hang on a second. I'm kind of wary of Carrie's question, so I know.
No, this is softball, okay? Now this is probably the most important question about why we're doing the tour. So many of you saw the pamphlets at the back about educate before you vaccinate. Please feel free to take that. We will make a PDF of that available. But this is about sharing with the people that are just not 100% sure what to do. They're afraid, they want their kids safe, they're buying into the narrative. Please take the information, hand it out, distribute it, unvax, vax. We are seeing so many people, when they came out with you gotta get your third and fourth booster now, suddenly common sense was starting to penetrate, going, well, if it's working so well, why are we doing this, right? But what I wanna know is, everybody here is pretty informed on things. What is probably the most important piece of information you can give to somebody who has children, who's thinking about getting their children vaccinated, okay? And I want everybody to be equipped with how to help people who are undecided without being, you can't get your kids vaccinated. A lot of people have drunk the Kool-Aid on this one. So what's the antidote?
I think the most important thing for people who are thinking of getting their kids vaccinated is to help them to realize that firstly, that children are 100 times more likely to die from the shot than they are from COVID. Kids don't get sick from COVID. The second thing is, they'll say, but what about going to grandma? This is to keep grandparents safe. Children don't spread COVID either. As the other doctors mentioned, it's adults that give it to kids, not the other way around. So kids don't get COVID. Well, if they do, 3/4 of them don't even know they've got it. 3/4. They don't die from it. It's not an issue for kids. The flu is much more lethal to kids than COVID. And how many kids do you know that have died from the flu? But this idea that they will somehow be protecting others is absurd. It is just not true. So I think those are the two most critical things, because that's often we're told it's our duty to get vaccinated to protect other people. Well, let the other people get it if they want the protection. They've got this weird idea where their vaccine only works if you've had yours. I mean, how much logic is that? It's ridiculous.
So we hear a lot about the cardiovascular issues with the spike protein, but I'm curious about the neurological issues with the blood-brain barrier being severed. Is that something you guys can speak to?
Yes, so as I mentioned, these little RNA capsules are designed to pass through cell membranes. And so these things cross the blood-brain barrier. And as I mentioned, these things, you have a lot of blood that circulates through your brain. So these spikes go everywhere. So I have the majority of the vaccine-injured patients that I have in my practice have neurological injuries. Some of them are lung problems, and maybe it's heart as well, but I suspect it's lungs. But yeah, these things get into your brain. They really do. And because brain does not recover. It does not regenerate. Once you damage your brain, it is permanently damaged. And that's the only one you've got. So, again, once this is in, you can't get it out. And once the damage is done, it's done. And all you can do is try and live with it. That's about as...
Is there any risk to other things getting in once it's severed, or is it the spike protein itself causing the issues?
Yes. Dr. Kennedy was just mentioned, the other possibility is Guillain-Barré syndrome, where you get a sort of an ascending paralysis that starts in your peripheries. That people get that from the flu shot and from other vaccines, but it is certainly a feature of this as well. So it can affect every part of your nervous system. As I mentioned, the spine, if you end up with weakness. I have 2 patients that are absolutely incapacitated by what they describe like electric shocks that shoot into their limbs, that just take them by surprise. I have one patient who can't use a computer mouse anymore because even the weak electric field from a computer mouse gives her these electrical jolts that shoot through her body. So the rate, this not only has these shots broken all records for killing and maiming more people in history, any vaccine in history, but they also broken all records for the greatest variety of damage imaginable. I mean, the variety is absolutely endless. And the worst is still to come, because with each new booster, the damage will accumulate. And we know that the side effects after the second shot are worse than the first, because each one, you're primed by, they add, your body is primed by the ones before. And yeah, this is a tragic thing that is happening to this nation.
Thank you.
Okay.
Next, please. Just speak in mouth, just speak in mouth, close to it. Yeah. And speak. Yeah.
If my friend gets COVID, should I stay away from her?
Good question.
Now, can I say, is that a question? 2 questions. If she gets like natural COVID, like she gets infected type of thing?
Like if she gets the needle.
Or she gets the shot?
that's the
shot.
If she
Okay.
gets the shot.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, we know that vaccine shedding is definitely a feature. Pfizer mentioned it in their study design, page 67 and 68, if you want to look it up, of their guidelines for their brief research that they did before they rolled it out. They spoke about something that is released from the breath and the skin of vaccinated people, and they specified that pregnant and breastfeeding women that spend time in close contact with vaccinated people needed to be monitored. So Pfizer was aware of this before this vaccine rolled out. They didn't call it shedding, and they didn't say what was shed. They just said pregnant and breastfeeding women who spend time with vaccinated people needed to be monitored. So the answer to your question is, we don't really know. But there have been, all over the world, there have been women who have noticed abnormal menstrual bleeding. Even postmenopausal women who didn't have their periods anymore would start bleeding again from being close to other people that have been vaxxed. So I think vaccinated people should be put into isolation for a period. They're definitely a risk to us, and they should be quarantined. I think it's quite simple.
This is where Dr. Hoff and I disagree. I think it's, again, this divide and conquer issue. We have to really overcome this. We need to protect those vulnerable, and if we're not vulnerable, we need to figure out what is going on with the shedding phenomenon and how to protect ourselves. So let us do some experimenting. Let us try different things. Increase your vitamin D levels, take ivermectin and put it on your skin. Try a lot of different things to try to come up with a solution so we don't have this divide among the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. We're all frightened to bits of each other. You know, fear comes first, and then anger, and then resentment, and then next thing you know, you've got the pitchforks going after each other. So I think isolating it, although I think Trudeau would be happy because he'd get some more hotels going there, but and of course that's the first solution, is to isolate, right? But hopefully we put our brains together and have the ingenuity and figure out how to solve this problem without going as far as that.
And I'm going to say one other thing. If you have any friends or family that contract COVID naturally, like, you know, just congratulate them, because now they're going to be immune, right? And, you know, if you really cared about what was transpiring, Bonnie Henry knows full well that the vaccine has failed, and I don't even like to use the medical intervention has failed. I have in my possession an affidavit sworn by one of her underlings, Dr. Newhouse from the Public Health Office, swearing that they think the vaccine's only good for 4 months, and that's with 2, okay? So if that's the case, and let's just go with them on this one, then what the heck are all those people doing at Rogers Arena just because they have a vaccine passport? She knows that they can contract COVID, that they can get sick, they can spread it, all those other things, okay? What we really need, if we were to go down and entertain, which we're not, we're just, dreaming here, an immunization passport. That's what we should have, right? A green pass because I'm immunized, right? I had COVID and I have the best immunity going, right? And I think Dr. Longhouse talked a little bit about the immunity compared to some of the COVID virus that we do know about. And the only difference was about, 20% in what they were looking at?
No.
But the immunity lasted, right, for a number of years?
There's no doubt that natural immunity is far better than anything you get with these shots. When they looked at the Pfizer shot, that is 95% effective, but they were talking about the relative risk reduction. They weren't talking about absolute risk reduction, which actually is 1.4%. In other words, those shots don't do anything to protect you from death or ICU admission or even hospitalization. They were only shown to reduce your symptoms, and this is particularly true for the kids. Even though they reduced the symptoms after 7 days from the shot, they had a lot of side effects in the first 7 days after getting those shots, which are completely ignored. But many of them were systemic things, and some of them required hospitalization. So natural immunity is by far, as they say, it's long-lasting. It will probably last you the rest of your life, not just for that particular virus, but for all viruses that are similar. You can handle up to 20% different strains, and most of the strains that we're seeing now are less than 1% genomic change. So you can handle the Omicrons or the Moronic or whichever ones you want to come up against. Natural immunity is great. And Dr. Hoffman's got a great story about when he had COVID. I don't know if he's going to tell it or not. So he's a good guy for us to hang around because he's got immunity, right? He can protect us all. But so actually, if you've had COVID, and a lot of people have had COVID, they just don't have the symptoms. We probably have herd immunity already. We have 60-70% of people in North America have been exposed to the coronavirus. You just name it. A lot of us didn't have symptoms. And like the people in the audience, if you're all taking vitamin D, you're good to go. So aim for natural immunity. The vaccine, if it lasts 4 months, it only lasts to reduce your symptoms a little bit. All right? So as far as I'm concerned, that's not helpful.
I just wanted to say we need more moles in government, so thank you very much, Carrie, for finding a mole in government.
Hi, my name is Rainey. I have 4 kids. My 2 older stepkids are 15 and 10. And I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. My 15-year-old has been vaccinated against my husband and my better judgment. Now the 10-year-old is eligible. I woke up this spring, mostly thanks to God, and some thanks to Dr. Charles Law for his bravery. Now the 10-year-old, he's the only one in his household, because we're a 2-family household that's not vaccinated, except for the really little one there. And he's not listening to what his dad and I have to say to him anymore. So, because he says he's too scared. He's scared that his mom and his siblings are going to die from the vaccine. And when I did show him some bad reactions, he got anxiety. How do we talk to children about this? They're now eligible. Anybody with a child, because of the Infants Act, is eligible. Their child can walk into a gymnasium and get their own vaccine. They shouldn't, but it can happen. How do we talk to them so that what's happened to my stepson doesn't happen to anybody else? They don't get so scared that they can't talk about it. What do we show them?
kids, anxiety is relieved by being outside. When playing outside, just being outside all the time, that really relieves anxiety.
So I think we have to remember that everybody's fearful about what? There's no reason to be fearful, right? So even, COVID numbers are minuscule. Under 19, as far as October 23rd, 2 children, and those 2 children were sick kids. In terms of vaccine, although if you look at the risk-benefit, the risks are higher than the benefits for children. No question, because the risks of COVID are so low. But even if they get vaccinated, it's still a small number. So what we need to do is not, educate our kids to be fearful. It's educate our kids to think critically. You go through it with them, but you eliminate the fear. And this is what all this is. This is all about fear and control. So there is no need to be fearful.
Throw the TV out.
Fear is a powerful weapon. It is the weapon of the enemy. Every tyrannical regime in history has used fear as its primary method of controlling people. And what we're in now is no different. The authorities have driven a narrative of fear by vastly exaggerating the dangers of COVID to prepare us for their poisonous shot. And a gentleman earlier asked about, so why would an upstanding, intelligent Christian doctor be pushing this? The answer is fear. It is amazing the power of television. Most of the people who are not worried about COVID don't watch TV. The question was asked, why were the Amish not affected by COVID? They don't have TV sets. There is a way to turn off the fear. There's a button on the bottom that says off. But COVID is a very serious disease for some people. And everyone, whether they're vaxxed or not, is going to get it sooner or later. I grew up in South Africa, and so in February of this year, I went to South Africa to my very frail and elderly 89-year-old mother, and I took her ivermectin, and I took her all the vitamins that are recommended by the FLCCC, and I said, do not have this shot. It has not been tested in your age group. There is clear evidence of harm. Even back in February, there was evidence of harm. I said, it is not safe. This is a much safer plan, but you need to be ready so that you do not live in fear. So she got COVID about 3 months ago, and she is fine. I refuse to have the shot because I really think that it is more dangerous than COVID. So I got ivermectin for myself. Before I answer that, as some of you may... Dr. Montaz joked about my story about getting COVID. I'll just tell it to you briefly. My medical practice got burned back in June. Some of you might have heard about it in the town of Lincoln. So I was really worried about how I would, and I was fired from the emergency room for causing vaccine hesitancy. So in fact, I was fired for explaining to an emergency room nurse why somebody who had had natural immunity to it didn't need to be vaccinated. I was fired for explaining that. So I couldn't work as an emergency room doctor anymore, and my practice was burnt to the ground, And so I had a huge problem. How was I going to get COVID? I wanted natural immunity. I had my ivermectin and my vitamin D and all the zinc and the other things. I wanted natural immunity. I didn't want to live in fear. So fortunately, during the fire season, I was battling with the fire, and a friend came to help me, and I got COVID. And I didn't even think it was COVID. I just felt slightly aching for a couple of days, but I was desperate to have a positive PCR test to prove that I had it. So I went for a COVID test. And the next day, this nurse phones me up, and she was really hesitant on the phone. And you could hear she thought I was going to be terrified. And she told me it was positive. And I said, you serious? That is fantastic. I am so pleased. I said to my medical practice got closed. I got fired from the emergency room. I didn't know how I was going to get COVID. Thank you so much. Anyway, ivermectin works great. And by the way, I used horse ivermectin because I wanted to test. I had the pills that I bought $900 worth of them back when you could still get them. I stocked up. But I had horse ivermectin, and I wanted to test it and make sure it was good. I mean, I knew so many people that had used it and there'd been no problems, but I wanted to test it on myself. You know, there was a time back in the old days when they didn't do sort of clinical trials. They used to use criminals for testing things. Well, now they're using you, but anyway. but doctors used to sometimes use criminals to test new treatments, and if they survived, then they'd get their freedom. And sometimes they couldn't find criminals that were willing to do it, so the doctors would test it on themselves. Well, I tested it on myself, and it works great. So where do you get it? Yeah, so doctors are not allowed to prescribe it anymore. Despite being considered safe and effective in 79 countries around the world, it's not safe in Canada. It's safe if you use it for worms, but not for COVID. Go figure that out. Yeah, unfortunately, the dose that you need for worms wouldn't be enough. Yeah, because you've got to take it for a few days. Big worms. Big worms, yeah. So you've got to find, people are unfortunately being forced to use veterinary products. It's really unfortunate, but I know hundreds of people that have used them with good effectiveness and no problems. I had one patient who got the math wrong trying to calculate his dose. He took 15 times the dose. His wife took 10 times the dose. They were both so impressed at how well it worked.
The trouble is they both eat a lot of hay now.
No, so unfortunately, you've got to get it from a veterinary supplier. Not from a vet; they won't give it to you. You've got to pretend you've got a horse, and they usually ask you a whole lot of questions like, how much did you give your horse last time, and how big's your horse, and all that stuff. So you've got to think of the answers ahead of time. It's ridiculous. It's crazy. But if you can find it online, that might be the thing to do. Don't use Google. Use DuckDuckGo or something else like that, because Google tracks you and censors things, and Google's not good. But just use a more reliable search engine. But you've got to look for agricultural products, veterinary products, unfortunately.
So thanks, Charles. Yeah, I missed an opportunity last night to do a really great fundraiser because down in the Lower Mainland, where I come from, the ivermectin supply stores for vets were actually asking people for pictures of their horse before they would sell it. So I have 2 horses, and if anybody wants ivermectin, if they need a picture of a horse, send me $20. All proceeds go to the Doctor store. And you can have your choice. I even have a kissing llama, okay? So whatever you want your picture to work with.
The way I did is I had my wife stand outside the door and do a name. I got a horse. Yeah. Just to come back to your question though, when it comes to kids, because we all have kids, I think most of us have kids, grandkids, kids learn best not by telling them, but by showing them. And when it comes to fear, we have to kind of overcome our own fears. Our fear of how this is going to turn out, the fear of the enemy, the fear of so many different things. Now, we've been kind of driven that way ourselves, particularly through mass media and so on. So I think the best way to show fearlessness, the best way to teach your kids how to be fearless is to be fearless yourself.
Yes. Here, here.
Okay? I know that might sound a little bit trite, but we have to find ways of showing that. For example, I mean, you could have a beach ball and paint it up to look like a virus and kick it around the living room, right? So in other words, you do stuff that doesn't actually confront with information so much as show how lighthearted it is to deal with these things that other people are taking so seriously, and to get rid of your own fears and trepidations. Another question.
Appreciate you guys coming here and teaching us so much about the mRNA vax. I've always been a strong supporter of science, and this one scares the shit out of me in terms of how they're using it as an experiment. At the same time, there is the old adenovirus, Johnson & Johnson, and we don't approve it in Canada for some reason. It's one shot, it's easier to store. What are your thoughts on why we're not approving it, and what are your thoughts on if you had to do it as an immune or a compromised individual or vulnerable individual, how do we go about getting those people that, and where are your thoughts on it itself?
Yeah. We'll have a few different opinions on this.
If they allow you to have your whatever green passport by inhaling the adenovirus shot, that should be perfectly fine. The reason I say that is they did studies on adenoviruses where they took inactive adenoviruses, so adenoviruses that weren't replicating, and they tossed a bunch onto a cell culture. And then they looked at the cell culture and they did a genetic exam, like an ELISA or a PCR, and they looked at how many of the cells that were exposed to inactivated adenovirus after they washed the cells off had adenovirus DNA inside them. And it was anywhere from 1 in 100 to 1 in 1,000. So adenoviruses get integrated every now and then into DNA. Now you have to start thinking critically. So how come doesn't everyone who gets a runny nose or a cough from an adenovirus get cancer, right? Well, there's actually a brilliant solution to that, because normally adenoviruses, they only infect surface cells. The surface cells inside your nose, the surface cells in the back of your throat, the surface cells of your lung. And those cells are replaced every 30 to 90 days. So if you get a DNA change, and that adenovirus is floating around, it goes into an epithelial cell of your lung and says, hey, I'm just going to walk right into the nucleus and maybe make some kind of random change, and I'm just going to insert myself here in your DNA. Well, 30 days later, that entire cell is out the window. It's not there anymore. So that's not going to turn into a cancer. However, if you start injecting adenoviruses into the blood, that's a whole different ballgame. Because now that adenovirus has the opportunity to get into cells that have to live for 10 years, 20 years, or even your whole life. And if you have too many of those DNA mutations in a long-lived cell, then that increases your chances of cancer.
Okay, so do I understand it right that you're saying it's just as risky as the mRNA transplanting the same way? As you
I don't know which is riskier, but I mean, if you just leave the natural world alone and let your infections go in through the proper orifices instead of into the blood, like with a needle, then pretty much the body's just fine as it is, and it'll deal with any problems, and you won't have any long-term problems with that. But the whole idea of inserting things into the blood that have no business in the blood, well, that's just going to cause problems.
I'd like to kind of answer that in a different way. Here we have some governmental agencies who are going after our children with a shot that's going to kill them. Many of them, potentially, right? There's no reason to give it to them because they have no risk. So it's all on the negative side. And they're going after the children down to 6 months next. They've already got the studies in. So would you take any shot from people that are acting like predators? Do you have any way that you would trust that the ingredients of that shot are what they're telling you they are? You know, they don't have to give us the ingredients until the end of the study. And for Pfizer, that's early 2023.
76 years they pushed it off.
Yeah, that's for giving us all their study protocol. But so what I'm saying is that even before you get into which is better for you or not better for you, it's the issue of would you trust something that they're going to be injecting into you at this time based on the evidence of what they're up to. And that's even, you know, discounting all the other things we've seen in these under the microscope, right? The nanotechnology, etc. So hopefully that will answer it. I mean, it's we don't even have to go to the science to see that these people are acting badly. And would we take candy from them? Would we take an apple from them? Would we take an injection from them? And I think we'd all have to say, never.
Choose to remain human.
Okay?
Thank you.
Okay.
So like you said, you know, just a couple of things in terms of vaccines, and that's why, to be honest, I can't answer that question. And for example, Pfizer, in terms of the approval by FDA, there's a group of doctors that are, you know, suing the FDA to find out why they approved this vaccine under an emergency basis, because it took 108 days for the FDA to approve this vaccine. And Pfizer, or FDA right now, has said, and this is no joke, that they've received over, I think, 350,000 pages. Number one, they need to redact those pages before releasing them, and they can only release approximately 500 a month. So it would take over 75 years to release the reasons that this vaccine was approved. So we don't know. Secondly, is if you look at the studies are all geared towards success, right? So it doesn't matter if vaccine works or not. That's not what the study will show. They'll modify a study midway to show it to be successful. For example, Pfizer vaccine again, they, you know, when they did their studies, they vaccinated 22,000 people. And they had a control group of 22,000 people. And this study was supposed to go 3 years. And you're not supposed to modify a study. You know, modifying a study is bad. But what they actually did is they changed it from 3 years to 6 months because they realized that the vaccine wasn't efficacious after 6 months. And what did the study show? So the study showed that the vaccinated group, 22,000 people, 1 person died. In the unvaccinated group, died of COVID. 1 person died of COVID. In the unvaccinated group, 2 people died of COVID, 22,000. So they said, oh, the vaccine is 100% effective. But underneath all that, they published, but in the small print, all-cause mortality, meaning that how many people died overall. In the vaccinated group, 20 people died total. In the unvaccinated group, 15 people died. And the difference was in the cardiovascular death. So more people died of cardiovascular causes. Okay, so who do we trust, right? So that is the problem. You know, I personally can't answer that question because the science is flawed. You know, so.
Excuse me. I also read that study.
Yeah.
And after the end of the study, they offered the vaccine to those that weren't vaccinated.
The control, exactly.
5 more people died.
Yeah. And suddenly you lose the control group. And this is what's happening with all vaccine mandates and with our children. I mean, you know, from one generation to the next, suddenly there's, you know, and I wasn't aware of this, to be totally honest. Prior to this COVID thing, I was kind of blind. I was one of those doctors a little bit blind about vaccines. And, you know, and you're looking at from one generation to the next, suddenly to be able to go to school, you're mandated to have vaccines. Okay, so you're mandated, meaning that you cannot go to school unless you get those vaccines. And so suddenly we lose the control group, right? So we don't know what, and suddenly there's a spike in, you know, autism, and we're not talking mild autism, but, you know, bang your head autism to the wall, you know, increase in ADHD, increase in asthma, increase in all these diseases that a previous generation didn't have. You know, and so we have to look at when something increases to that extent, that's not genetics. So it's not a genetic change from one generation to the next. There's no spike. So when there's a spike like that, that means there's an environmental change. So what is that change, right?
Last question.
All right, so my question has to do with independent analysis of the ingredients in the vaccines in different groups in Germany and Spain, I think. Do you have any comments on that?
Do they have comments? I think your state is asking that.
I was just waiting for someone with that question, because this is an area that I'm particularly interested in. And because they looked at it, it kind of started off in Spain with the fifth column, right? And they looked at these, they got their hands on a vial that wasn't really, they didn't know how it had been passed to them and how it had been handled and so on, but it was presumed to be a Pfizer shot. And they looked under the electron microscope and they saw something called graphene oxide. At least they saw stuff that looked like graphene oxide. They didn't do spectroscopy or spectrometry at that time, but subsequent groups have done that, and they found that there's more in these shots than messenger RNA. There's nanotechnology. There's graphene oxide, and you may have heard of people having magnets stuck to them and stuff like that, or even just metal. And it starts off at the site of the shot, but then it travels around the body, and sometimes it's on the other side, sometimes it's on people's head. I've seen people have cell phones stick to their head, right, after they've had the shot. And on the chest, and you don't even have to get the shot. I saw one little child that was exposed to someone who had the shot who could have had a fork attached to their chest. Mind you, it was stuck in. No, I just kidding. So yes, there's something in these shots, and this goes back to the idea of we're not being told what's in those shots. And our government agencies aren't even asking. So it's taking independent people to pull that stuff out, to find vials and to look under it and to see what's in there. And there's all sorts of unusual things. We probably don't have to go into them, but there's more in there than we even know what it is. You know, nanotechnology that's been around for a long time, but probably created by groups like DARPA and so forth. So, yeah.
Yeah, so you witnessed magnetism, like with an earth magnet?
Yeah, I haven't myself because I don't know anybody close to me that I can try it on. But they did do a study in Luxembourg where they were aiming to get 50 people who had had the shot to test them and 50 people who had not, and they did it in a mall. And they were trying to get 50, but they stopped at 30. They found 29 out of 30 people who had been given the shot had magnetism, that they could stick metal to their shoulder where they had the shot. 30 out of 30 who had not had that, they couldn't stick it to. But the reason they stopped at 30 is because the looks on the people's faces who realized they'd been given something that magnetized them was so awful. People were crying. They were wiping their sweaty hands on their clothing. And they were just so shocked to realize that this sort of a crime had been perpetrated on them without their knowledge, that the researcher couldn't go beyond 30. He stopped this experiment then. So it's a definite phenomenon. There's research to show it. And if you go on the internet, you'll see people sticking coins to their forehead. I've seen people do it in front of me. Actually, one person, now that I think of it, did show me that they could have coins attached to them, and it tends to move around in the body. And that's why I usually tell people, based on this nanotechnology, that if you're having side effects of the shot, turn off your Wi-Fi. Don't wear headphones. Don't get an MRI of your head because that's a magnet, right? It's a big magnet, and if we have a magnet in your body, it's going to be moving around, and you may be thinking of the idea of shrapnel type of thing, right? Nanoshrapnel, or Yeah. So in other words, you don't want to move this stuff around. But the human body is pretty amazing. We know that as doctors, that we can handle a lot. We can detox things. We can capture things. We have cells with their job to go and catch all those funny things and to take them out of the body, or to sequester them somewhere where they can't do you harm. And we're smart. Right? We've been given this as a big challenge, how to figure out what this shot is all about, why it's being given to us, why we're accepting it, and what's in it. And we're going to do that, right? And so we'll untie this big knot that we're in. All right.
All right, so a couple of things. The Infants Act was raised about what is the law around minor children. So all children right now are being set up to be vaccinated. They have pop-up clinics happening. The government just recently passed legislation that you cannot protest around schools or hospitals. I can tell you that there's a new order coming down because so many of the police now refuse to harass or arrest people that are breaking the orders of the government, that they are going to be basically deputizing transit police on the 15th of December. That's how far they're going. So, you know, I don't ever give too much credit to something that is provably evil. Quite often, the problems that we have in our society are our own fault because we haven't been vigilant, we haven't been active, and we haven't used our voices. But on September 3rd of this year, Dr. Monica Noss, who heads up the BC Centre for Disease Control, and she's a good friend of Bonnie's. As a matter of fact, Bonnie boasts in her book about how often she consults with this organization, and she used to work with them. On September 3rd, in preparation for children under 12, 5 to 11, being allowed to be vaccinated, she sent out this communique. And in it, she addressed all the medical health officers, public health nursing administrators, holders of communicable disease control manuals, so basically public health nurses, everybody who has access to this. And she announces in this document that they have now removed all barriers for children under 12 to be basically given the intervention or vaccine, as this case may be. This is a lie. This is a provable lie. We had our lawyers immediately write to them and go, wait a minute. Even the Infants Act, for all its problems, and it is problematic, still requires children to be a mature minor, to be able to be reasonable enough to give informed consent. Monica Noss knows this, but what she's telling all the administrators, right, the minions who are injecting children, that they don't have to worry about it. Well, yes, they do, and our lawyer said, we will sue you if you do this. She hasn't retracted this yet. So we could go on and on and on and on for hours here tonight, but I want to thank everyone who stood up and had the courage to ask a question. And I want to especially thank that young girl. Where is she? Can you stand up? You know, it has inspired me, and I'll be talking with the doctors later about creating a kids' question and answer time, you know? We also need a grade 6 propaganda primer too, I think, you know, to teach people how to start questioning these things. Don't let fear, as Dr. Malcolm said, fear is the wrong emotion to be making decisions with, right? You need to be strong for your kids, your families. You need to be steadfast. And, you know, we've been conditioned that as Canadians, we're supposed to be nice and gentle. I'm giving you permission just to be royally ticked off, okay? And you know what? If you can't be reasonable, be totally unreasonable. We'll be better off than we are right now. So at the back, there's a few brochures. Please pick them up. There's also, in case anybody did not get signed up, please give us your name and your email address so we can keep you connected with what's happening. This is the brochure put out by the Doctors Tour, okay, along with the Canadian Health Association, or the Alliance.org, okay? So many of these doctors belong to that. There are some other very good organizations that are happening. Take extra. We will make sure these are on the website. Go to the website that is on this brochure and that one. I think we'll put the video up on both places, okay? So make sure you get this so you can find the video of tonight's event. So in addition to thanking the doctors, and I'll come back to them, I also want to thank Todd, our videographer. He is traveling with the doctors, and I just want to thank him for the time and professionalism so that you can share this important information with other people, okay? Also, for all the volunteers that stepped up, who I don't even know, thank you. Awesome job. thank you. And to your board members and your congregation for sharing this wonderful facility with us. What a blessing. All right, there is an envelope at the back as well for anyone who wants to give significant donations or wants to contact us in the future. So with that, I'm going to ask the doctors to stand, and I want to say thank you one more time to these amazing people. They are being extremely generous with their time, so they will be here because there's always questions that didn't get asked, and you feel free to come up and chat with them, get your picture taken if you want. And Anna has one last thing.
If you're going to vaccinate our kids, remove the non-liability, right?
All right, everybody, please stay connected. Thank you. Stay strong, stay free.
Okay, on this page, it's still on live.
Yeah, so go to my CBA. Okay.
It's still on live.